I want to talk about World War II propaganda and goals. The British propaganda had a sentiment of sacrifice, that the citizens were to ration food, rubber, metal, and clothing. The citizens were also asked to fight and volunteer for the war effort, to defend the motherland against the Axis powers. New opportunities also arrived during World War II, and propaganda asked women to participate in non combatant positions and new organizations like the Women's Land Army. In terms of British goals if they won the war, Winston Churchill wanted an unconditional surrender of all Axis powers, as well as all land conquered by German and Axis powers to be independently restored to those countries. Churchill was a believer in imperialism and wanted to retain all empire holdings, most especially India, after the war. And along with that, he wanted to establish a Jewish state in the Middle East that would serve Britain and would be a resettlement of refugees from the Holocaust and be militarily reliant on Great Britain and the United States. Soviet propaganda was different. Hitler was fighting a war of ideology, and because he was doing so, many atrocities were happening on the Eastern Front, including the starvation of thousands of Soviet POWs and the murder of thousands of Jews by the Holocaust of bullets. These atrocities created a certain type of propaganda on the Russian home front. Stalin changed his propaganda ideology quickly when he realized that the best way to galvanize Russian citizens was by appealing to a defense of the fatherland rather than a defense of communist ideology. This is exemplified when the slogan on the masthead of the Pravda changed from "Proletarians of all lands unite" to "Death to the German occupiers." Stalin also wanted to appeal to the citizens' patriotism and their common cause, which he exemplified in his radio speech in July of 1941 when he addressed the Russian people as his brothers and sisters. Stalin knew that this tactic of propaganda would be highly effective in getting his citizens, and more importantly, his soldiers, to obey his commands and believe they could win the war. More than anything, the Russian state wanted their citizens to believe that this was a people's war, a just defense of the motherland. To help Russian soldiers believe in this cause, newspapers would detail the atrocities that were happening in German-occupied territory, and tell the public that those atrocities are what will happen to each Russian citizen if they do not win the fight. Stalin had different visions of victory. He wanted to expand territory. Most especially, he wanted to annex Estonia, Latvia, and all of Lithuania. The three Baltic states is just an example of some of the other lands Stalin wanted to annex into Russian territory, such as Greece, Turkey, Iran, and Japan. While Stalin wanted to annex territory, he also wanted to set up independent communist states. Territory for Poland was something he was very concerned with, especially the domestic situation. Stalin wanted to set up a new communist party that would become the government in Poland. While Poland wasn't to become Soviet territory, the Polish government was to be loyal to Stalin. This would help expand communist ideology, empower the Russian state, and help ensure the Russian protection from Germany. In terms of Russia's allies, Stalin did not expect the closer alliance with Britain and the United States to last. One of these reasons was Stalin's perceived ideology that a communist state would inevitably come in conflict with capitalist countries. Propaganda was a very powerful tool in the United States. It helped unite the public and the military in the fight to win the war. Propaganda came in many forms, such as posters, comic books, radio broadcasts, movies, magazines, leaflets, and newspapers. Posters were produced asking Americans to try and conserve and ration products such as fats, butter, coffee, and rubber. Conservation was the largest theme among posters produced during the war, as 1 in 7 posters carried this theme. Propaganda had an important impact on American women during World War II, as it persuaded women to do their part in the workplace. Women worked in a variety of positions previously closed to them. However, they played a huge role in the aviation and munitions industry. The U.S. government's Rosie the Riveter propaganda campaign was based in small part on a real-life munitions worker. Primarily a fictitious character, the strong bandana-clad Rosie became one of the most successful recruitment tools in American history, and the most iconic image of working women during World War II. Japanese people both admired and feared Western powers. Japanese propaganda against Americans portrayed Westerners as demons. Japanese used propaganda to dehumanize their enemies. Japanese soldiers and citizens were expected to portray the following characteristics: loyalty, piety, death as a selfless thing, greater good for the whole, which is basically Japanese fascism. The war became an act of purification for many. All honor should go to the emperor, who they thought was divine. The National Munitions Spiritual Mobilization Campaign was launched by the Japanese government in 1937 and would continue in various forms through the end of the war. The program impacted propaganda, patriotism, the education of Japanese children, and the various wartime organizations which existed at the time. Production of consumer goods became almost non existent in Japan during the war so that all industries could focus on wartime production. The Japanese government introduced a system of stringent rationing that, in addition to food, included clothing, nails, needles, bandages, shoes, cooking oil, tire tubes, and many other items. The Japanese people suffered during this time as it was difficult to come by necessary, everyday items. So I want to talk about Germany propaganda now. Germany from the beginning centered on the ideal that Germany was not only wronged in the First World War, but also that Germany's struggles was one of destiny. Propaganda in Germany was everywhere as a state-sponsored machine, fueled by the Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels attempted not only to create a national community through movement of unity, but also presented Nazi symbolism and ideas at every occasion possible, from government buildings to festivals, and making Nazi anniversaries legal holidays. Goebbels wanted to work to ensure that the German entertainment industry, such as radio and theater, promoted the German ideal, as well as depicting the war in a positive light. The goal, according to Joseph Goebbels, was to influence all sectors of public life. Obviously, Jewish artists were excluded from the membership needed to be part of the Nazi public sphere, meaning Jews, as well as communists, Democrats, or any other subversive group, was not allowed access to movies, music, literature, newspaper, or even retail. Joseph Goebbels, one of Hitler's closest associates, was the well-educated orator and propaganda chief spanning from the time of Hitler's rise to his death. Goebbels was arguably one of the most anti-Semitic members of Hitler's bureaucratic cabinet, who managed to not only control nearly every aspect of the public's lives, but also gave specific speeches for Hitler's similar tenacity. In 1942, the Reich Chamber of the Press controlled 80% of the nearly 1,000 newspapers within Germany. Loudspeakers projected messages to the people open on the streets, and the radio chamber created an affordable radio for all the homes of all German people. Books by Jewish writers, or even Aryan pacifists and liberals, were burned and destroyed. Bookstores and libraries purged. In the movies, all Jewish work and anything criticizing the social order were banned. Art observers were commissioned by Goebbels to praise all new German works, and that was the only thing they could do. Most of the films before Hitler's ascension were banned. Hitler's intentions in the beginning focused on Germany's political and military domination of Europe, with also parts of Asia and Africa. Hitler envisioned an empire of the entirety of Europe, envisioning the defeat of both Great Britain and the Soviet Union, with only their fates up for judgment. Great Britain likely would see some type of satellite rule, while the Soviet Union would be nearly entirely destroyed and dismantled. Colonial lands in Africa would possibly supplement the agricultural requirements for the new Reich. Yet Hitler explicitly stated that the lands of the East were going to be the direct areas of Germanic resettlement. German lands within the German Reich was going to see some changes after the wars of domination were over. Berlin would be renamed Germania. German lands would be cleansed and purged of nearly all societal undesirables, which ranged from total annihilation to systematic sterilization. With the massive loss of male life evident to Hitler in 1943, he envisioned a birthing stimulus plan, allowing members of the SS to take multiple wives in an attempt to boost German populations. This included efforts to settle ethnic Germans in the land of Poland and Russia as part of greater efforts to boost the population and increase agricultural output. German urban centers would see a process of de-Christianization, renovation, and the creation of magnificent works of infrastructure and commemoration. Here's our works cited.